Kalen DeBoer and the Alabama Crimson Tide took over the day-to-day mainly because of the fact that Kalen DeBoer ran out there and talked about his quarterback situation and talked about the expectations for himself at the University of Alabama. Joe, because both of them are the hottest of topics today at the SEC Media Days, not Greg Sankey saying that he made Steve Sarkisian walk out to the A&M fight song. But regardless of that, wherever you want to start off here, Kalen DeBoer talking about expectations, and if the season started today, which, Joe, we only have 45 days until it starts, Ty Simpson would be his starting quarterback. What do you think about some of the comments that Kalen DeBoer here has mentioned?
Yeah, let's start with the expectations conversation because he didn't say anything that we weren't expecting when he talked about this. This was the quote that he said, if you internally ask us, no, in reference to if they felt they met expectations, we fell short of making the playoffs. It's as simple as that, right? And I felt like we didn't talk a lot at the end of the season about coaches of like, did they meet what we hoped or wanted or needed them to do to feel strong about going into their second season for a lot of these first-year coaches. Right. And if you just look at the record and what they did, not looking at who they lost to, they weren't short of expectations in my eyes. Having 9 wins after all the guys that left, all the depth that left, that to me was a quality regular season. But where I think that we can talk about Alabama and DeBoer not meeting those expectations was who they lost to. And who they lost to were a bad Oklahoma team that was up and down the entire year, and Vanderbilt that was unexpectedly a tough battle for every opponent. And I feel like what DeBoer needs to take from last year into this year, Blake, is that they need to be consistent every single week. I give you credit as something that you brought up when he left Washington and went to Alabama, is that it's not like the Pac-12 where you can face off with a weak opponent after you get a big win and get a little bit of a reset. Yes. They treated that as such, and that is why they lost those 2 games that they should not have lost. Every opponent on your schedule in the SEC sees Alabama and sees an opportunity to make themselves relevant, to make themselves a lot bigger and make themselves seem much more successful than maybe they actually are. You are going
AKA Vandy.
AKA Vandy. You are going to get the best performance from your opponent because you're Alabama. So, Blake, that was like the biggest thing for me as I was reflecting on this, thinking about, did he meet expectations?
Well, to your point, when on that very quickly, there are 2 things can be true at once. Let's start off with the real truth. The real truth that nobody wants to say out loud, because it is Bama, is a coach going 9-3 in year 1 is not bad. No, I don't care. I don't care where you are. You can be at the University of Alabama. Hell, you can have Jesus Christ as your quarterback and still going 9-3. I still think is a very good feat. Now, Jesus would never lose a game, but that's neither here nor there. The point of it is that I don't think people understood that how much Bama actually lost going into the season. They had 30-plus players that entered the portal. They did and were able to get some. They got Ryan Williams into the fold. But I don't think that they, for what it's worth, got the benefit of the doubt that other teams were able to be or were given. Now, I don't think that Kalen DeBoer, for what it's worth, performed at some of the levels for coaches that came into the SEC with worse things around them happening. That, let me give an example. I think Brian Kelly did a better job when he came into LSU with 39 scholarship players, right? Like
I got to an SEC championship game.
Right, who got to an SEC championship game. I feel like Kirby, when he took over Georgia, did a better job. Now, the record didn't indicate it in year 1, but, Joe, the problem is that they had so much that they had to overcome. He didn't have a starting quarterback in the SEC like he had with Jalen Milroe. There are some other coaches that did come into stops, like, Joe, for example, Sam Pittman won 9 games at Arkansas in year 2. It's a much different feat, but they lost all of their games on the road. And I know that DeBoer talked about this. They lost to Oklahoma on the road. They lost to Vanderbilt on the road. The best team that they faced all year was the University of Georgia at home, and they won. Joe, the problem is that they could not sustain, and I don't think that the DeBoer culture was built in yet. And how could it be in year one when you got to go? Joe, Oklahoma is a top 10 environment in college football. It's not an easy place to go into and win. The bottom line is when you look at the University of Alabama, Joe, what was the real did we really expect them to make a national title run? Like, did we maybe we could have expected them to make a playoff, and that's fine. Look, you shouldn't lose to Vandy. You shouldn't lose to God bless it, Oklahoma. Thank you. You shouldn't lose those games. But the bottom line remains is that maybe you got one with Georgia that you probably shouldn't have gotten. And I think that that's more or less when I look at the expectations. Joe, I came into the season last year, if you remember my prediction, I did not have them in the playoff. I had them at 9-3 because I think when you lose that many players to the draft and then that many players to the portal, I don't care who it is. Nick Saban can come back tomorrow and take over a team, and I expect him to go 9-3. But we put so much on it because of what he had to follow that, number one, it's not fair to him to have to do that, but it's also to a point where you go into Tennessee and you lose. You go into Oklahoma and you lose. You go into Tampa against Michigan and you lose. You go into Nashville against Vandy and lose. Joe, they were dominated at home. They dominated. So you get to a place where now that you go into year two with the culture that he's trying to build, can they overcome some of those situations will be the ultimate question.
Anyone who listens to this show knows that we've actually been particularly hard on Alabama, me especially.
You have.
And yeah, I have. And there were times last year when they beat Georgia and I talked how like they proved they were the best team in the country at the time. That obviously changed very quickly and that take soured really quickly. But I've been quite hard on them. And it's interesting, like listening to and thinking about as we're reflecting on this, because again, we didn't have this conversation when the season ended. We just kind of moved on to the next things. I really do think to pull back and look at what it was accomplished in the first year in a hard conference, it was a pretty good season. And I think that there's two things that ultimately
when the conference was down, though, by the way.
Okay. I'm not going to take that bait from you. I'm not going to take that bait
you
from
said
you.
it.
No. I'm not talking about don't do this to me. There's two things that Alabama and Kalen DeBoer have done in the DeBoer era that I think save this situation and make us feel a lot better of the future course of this. How Kalen DeBoer has done in recruiting has been exceptional. That has blown away what anyone thought he was going to do. I would, if I looked at DeBoer coming from where he was coming from all the way across the country in the Northwest, having no real connections to the South, and to step into the recruit the way that he is with a brand that allows him to recruit at a high level,
yes,
but not faltering, I would be shocked that this is where he would be at this point. I thought he would do well, not to the degree that he is. And then, of course, what you just mentioned there, the Georgia win. If they had lost to Georgia, I think that we'd be talking about them completely differently. We would be discussing them in a completely different light if they did not beat Georgia when they did, because it would have been what would have been their most signature win last year.
LSU.
And that's a good win, but that's a team with a similar record as you. It was a really good performance by them.
Right.
Right.
Both would have been 8-4, right.
The Georgia win, I think, is the biggest that saves it. And I think that why no one really feels panicked, unless you're being hyperbolic and reactionary, is that they are setting the foundation defensively, especially to recruit this roster back close to what Nick Saban had. Maybe not exactly what Saban had, but it's at least getting close. Right.
Yeah, that's a big statement. Let me say this, though. I want to throw this out there to you. We will give you – let me say we because I don't want to speak for you. I will give you a pass on some situations, meaning you got to build in culture. You got a lot of things that you got to overcome. It's a new year. You're following Nick Saban. It's not like that's the easiest thing on planet Earth to do, right? Because it's just not. However, Joe, the reason they lost to Vandy was not necessarily personnel. The way that they lost to Oklahoma was not personnel. The way that they lost to Tennessee, I mean, you could make the argument that was maybe personnel. Maybe Tennessee was just better than them, and they did some better things down the stretch than they did. The problem with that, though, Joe, is remember the Vandy game when they refused to go outside of man coverage and Diego Pavia and company and the coaching staff with Clark Lee pieced them alive? If we're going to give him a pass, we also got to talk about the other reality. What is that other reality? That other reality is defensively, from an X's and O's standpoint, you got flat out coached by coaching staffs that you have no business at the University of Alabama of out coaching you. Joe, they did not out-athlete. Vandy did not out-athlete Alabama. They didn't. They out-coached them.
And out-willed them.
And out-willed them, yes. So, again, then you turn to Oklahoma a season ago, and you ask, well, they ran quarterback power how many times? That's Will, as you brought up. It's also that they did not change many things up X's and O's wise. Now, I say all that to say, obviously, I think they're going to be better this year. Obviously, I think that they're a playoff contender this year. And I don't think some of those things that happen in year one will yet happen again. However, there's a second however. Joe, there gets a point in time. Year one is year one, and you get a lot of leeway. You do some of the same shit defensively that you did last year, and it falls on your face again. That's when the excuses start going by the wayside.
They have to be. I think that's the biggest part. I have no fear about what the offense will look like. I think that it's going to be really different because Jalen Milroe's gone, but I think it's going to be a lot more level. It's going to be a lot more. It's going to be a lot more balanced because, like, think of when Michael Penix was at Washington. His first year starting, they were a little bit more balanced, and then he started to get super aggressive because he could be, and they were aggressive with the play calling. I think that Ty Simpson, which we'll get to in a second, if he's the assumed starter at the current moment, I think that his style of play will be closer to Michael Penix's, and they'll be able to move the ball more methodically down the field and then take shots when necessary instead of this up and down turnover-filled play that we got from Milroe in some spurts. Defensively is exactly where I think that they need to meet that expectation. They need to return to the level of dominance that we know. And I think that a lot of opponents, we could throw Tennessee into the mix, saw blood. They saw blood. They saw Alabama showing their mortality, which is incredibly rare, something that we haven't seen in 20 plus years, where their defense was not chopping down. Even in years where Nick Saban's defenses were at their worst, they were still light years ahead of what they did last year. And statistically, they weren't horrendous, but it's exactly what you just said. They gave up plays in some of the stupidest ways possible, especially in the QB run game. They have to be stronger. They have to be better prepared. It felt like there was a lack of preparedness that they needed to bring to these matchups that it felt like they got outcoached. Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee all felt like they got outcoached. I think that there's a chance that they are stronger. And I've said this before, and you and I have disagreed on this. I think that their defensive line is going to be better. They need better edge play because their edge rushers are kind of depleted since Dallas Turner left 2 years ago. But their interior group of James Smith and Tim Keenan, I think, could be some serious ass kickers.
Well, look, we've talked a lot about Bama, and we talked about them a lot last year. And the narrative from their fan base was, "Oh, defense wasn't our problem." You were at 50 in rushing defense a year ago. How did it get there? Diego Pavia, Michigan, etc. Like, again, when you left outside of your confines of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, teams pushed you around. Now, here's the second thing I want to throw your way. Caden Proctor was at SEC Media Days today. I don't have a problem with Caden Proctor. In some of the losses that they've had the last two seasons, I've seen him get pushed around. And not just him. The running game, Joe, the physicality and tenacity that Bama is known for, they didn't do a year ago. Again, how in the world again, Bama fans will hear what I just said and say, oh, you son of a bitch. No, you're not supposed to in year one under head coach. Legitimately. Joe, that is the hardest thing to find. It's the hardest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is to win up front, without a doubt. But going into year two, if some of your things, like you mentioned in the run defense, if some of the things that you mentioned, Joe, when they could not beat Tennessee and help out Jalen Milroe, and everybody knew that he was going to throw, when they played against Oklahoma, Joe, they couldn't run the football. Like, those are the two things that you got to do to get back where you are. You're a win away from getting back there and going 10-2 and getting to the playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that the O-line stuff's like a really good conversation to bring up as well. And Proctor, now the leader of this offensive line, with Booker gone, he has to be the guy. The one thing that's been like a little surprising to me, and I was talking about this with some of my scouting buddies, we nitpick little things like this. Apparently, Proctor's heavier than he was last year, which is wild to me, because the biggest talking point is if he lost weight, he would move better and he'd be more consistent.
He's not a tackle. And I told you that when he came into Bama, and I will tell you this 3 years after, he has never been a left tackle. He is a guard. How many
guards shouldn't be 370 pounds anyways? Like that's the problem here.
I'm not saying that they should be. He's always been a guard. Yeah. He would. Listen to me right now. He would be much better there. Now, one thing I would say that would help them is there was an excuse, or not really an excuse. There was a lot of people that put Jalen Milroe, which, listen, you can't, in the games that he lost, whether it be Oklahoma, whether it be Tennessee, whether it be Michigan, regardless of the game, he turned the ball over too much. Now, Ty Simpson, if you don't turn the ball over too much, maybe things turn for you in the way that they need to turn. Ty Simpson's got to hold on to the ball. But I would say the reason those turnovers happen too is a lot like what happened with Garrett Nussmeier a year ago. When you can't line up and run the ball, Joe, you had arguably the best guard in the country. When you're not giving him help, that's when things start to crumble. So again, I think you and I are higher on Bama in year two under DeBoer, but there's some context that got to come to this. And listen, here's what I finally say about Kalen DeBoer. He said we didn't meet expectations, and I got to be honest with you. So what? I'm not saying Joe. In the beginning of the season last year, I said they were going to 9-3. You literally met my expectations, literally. So for what it's worth, I think you're right on track for where you need to be.